Remember when Flipper seemed like the most wholesome show on television? For 3 years, families gathered around their sets every Saturday night to watch a boy and his loyal dolphins save the day, week after week, without a single dull moment. On camera, everything looked sunny, simple, and full of splashy family fun, the kind of squeaky clean adventure parents felt perfectly comfortable letting their kids watch alone every single Saturday evening. But behind the scenes, the real story of the animal who played Flipper was stranger, sadder, and a lot more complicated than anyone watching from home could have ever guessed. Today, we're counting down 15 surprising facts about Flipper, the 1964 series that turned a bottlenose dolphin into a household name almost overnight. We're talking about a secret bird hiding inside that famous voice, a real-life stunt double swap nobody saw coming, a shared house that fooled an entire audience, a handful of future Hollywood legends walking around unnoticed, and a tragedy that would eventually change the whole dolphin captivity industry forever. And trust us, you are not ready for what's waiting at number 1, because it's the kind of reveal that quietly rewrote how an entire industry thinks about the animals it puts on camera. So, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments if you remember watching Flipper the very first time it aired. We're also getting into a wild franchise family tree that eventually reached all the way to Hollywood royalty decades later, in ways nobody watching in 1964 could have predicted. Now, without any further delay, let's dive right into the countdown with number 15. Number 15, the toys nobody kept. Flipper wasn't just a television show. It was a full-blown merchandising machine before anyone even used that phrase to describe children's programming. Lunchboxes, board games, plush dolphins, coloring books, comic tie-ins. Even bath toys all carried that grinning dolphin face into living rooms across America. Kids begged their parents for Flipper gear, the same way later generations would beg for action figures tied to much bigger franchises. At the time, none of it seemed particularly special, just another cheap plastic toy destined for a toy chest and eventually a landfill somewhere down the line. But here is where it gets interesting. Because the show only ran for 3 seasons before wrapping production, that merchandise window was short, and most of it was never treated as anything worth preserving for the future. Parents tossed it out during spring cleaning, kids simply outgrew it, and decades passed before anyone realized how little of it had actually survived intact. Today, original Flipper collectibles from 1964 are shockingly hard to track down, and the rare pieces that do surface at auctions and estate sales sell for hundreds of dollars to collectors chasing a tangible piece of their childhood nostalgia. So, yeah, that dolphin-shaped lunchbox your grandmother tossed out back in 1975 might genuinely have been worth more than any of you could have guessed at the time. Vintage Flipper board games and unopened model kits now regularly show up on collector auction sites, occasionally fetching bids that would have seemed absurd to anyone standing in a 1965 five-and-dime store, paying a few coins for the exact same item off the shelf, back when nobody imagined a dolphin show would still matter, 60 years later. Number 14, the aquatic lassie nobody asked for until everyone loved it. When Flipper premiered in the fall of 1964, critics and audiences needed a quick way to describe what exactly they were watching, and the comparison that stuck almost immediately was the aquatic lassie. It made sense on paper. Just swap a loyal collie for a loyal dolphin, swap a rural farm for a tropical marine preserve, and keep the same basic formula of an animal hero saving humans from danger every single week without fail. But here is the part that is easy to forget decades later. Lassie had 4 legs, thick fur, and could be physically guided around a studio set on a simple leash whenever needed. Flipper had none of those production advantages whatsoever. Every single rescue, every gentle nudge, every dramatic tail walk had to be carefully coaxed out of a wild ocean animal that could not be bribed with a treat the same reliable way a trained dog could be. And somehow, the show pulled it off so convincingly that audiences genuinely believed Flipper understood spoken English, followed complex commands instantly, and cared about the Ricks family the way a devoted household pet would. That illusion of a thinking, feeling television star was so effective that it planted a seed far bigger than anyone realized at the time, and we'll get to exactly how big that seed grew later on this very list. Unlike Lassie, who was ultimately just a very well-trained dog performing familiar tricks, Flipper's stunts depended entirely on wild animal husbandry, patient conditioning, and a level of underwater choreography that most 1960s television crews had genuinely never attempted before, let alone perfected on a tight weekly broadcast schedule. Number 13, the family house that was secretly shared with another show entirely. If the Ricks family home on Flipper looked a little familiar to fans of another Ivan Tors production, that's because it absolutely was the exact same building. The same house used for Porter Ricks and his two sons also served as the home of the Wedlow family on Gentle Ben. Another nature adventure series from the exact same production company launched just a few years later. On camera, nobody watching at home was ever supposed to notice this small detail, and honestly, why would they have? These were two completely different shows, set in two supposedly different corners of the Florida wilderness, with entirely different casts and entirely different animal stars leading the weekly action. But here is where it gets weird once you know what to look for. Ivan Tors Films was running such a lean, efficient production operation that reusing sets, locations, props, and even entire houses between totally unrelated shows was simply standard practice behind the scenes. It saved money, saved precious shooting time, and let the crew pour their limited budget into the parts audiences actually cared about, like getting a wild, untrained dolphin to hit its marks on cue every single week. So, if you ever get a strange sense of déjà vu watching old Ivan Tors productions back to back, that's not a coincidence at all. That's just resourceful, budget-conscious 1960s Hollywood at work. Fans didn't widely piece this detail together until decades later. Once home video and eventually online streaming made it possible to pause, compare, and freeze frame two completely separate shows side by side for the very first time, turning a quiet production shortcut into shared internet trivia that fans now happily trade in comment sections decades later, long after either show first left the air. Number 12, the same three boats, every single week without fail. Television budgets in the 1960s were nowhere close to what they are today, and Flipper's producers got remarkably creative about stretching every single dollar as far as it could possibly go. One of the show's recurring transition shots featured the village of Key Biscayne, a scenic peninsula with boats drifting lazily through the background, used to set the scene right before cutting into the next storyline. Sounds harmless enough, right? Not exactly. Because if you watch closely across multiple episodes spanning different seasons, you'll notice the exact same boats, moving in the exact same direction, at the exact same unhurried speed, appearing again and again throughout the entire series run. That's not a coincidence, and it definitely wasn't an accident on the editor's part. It was stock footage, recycled scene after scene, to save the production both time and money, rather than sending an entire crew back out to film brand new transition shots every single week of the schedule. Modern audiences binge-watching the show on streaming platforms decades later have actually spotted this exact pattern and pointed it out online, turning a simple cost-cutting shortcut from 1964 into a genuine minor internet trivia moment. 60 years on, those same three boats are apparently still quietly making their rounds every time somebody presses play. It's a small, almost invisible detail on its own, but once a viewer notices it, it becomes genuinely impossible to unsee for the rest of the series, popping up in episode after episode like a strange recurring cameo nobody ever gets credited for, quietly saving the production money that went straight back into the water scenes audiences actually tuned in for. Number 11, Flipper was never actually one single dolphin at all. Here's a secret that would have genuinely shocked kids writing fan letters to their favorite marine television star. Flipper wasn't one dolphin, but a rotating cast of 5 different female bottlenose dolphins. Primarily a dolphin named Kathy, with Susie, Patty, Scotty, and Squirt, all filling in depending on the specific scene and stunt required that day. Female dolphins were specifically chosen for the role, and the reasoning behind that choice is stranger than most viewers would ever expect. Trainers found that females tended to be noticeably less aggressive than males, and crucially, their skin usually stayed free of the scars and scratches male dolphins commonly pick up from fighting each other out in the wild. That detail mattered enormously for close-up camera shots, where Flipper's smooth, unblemished skin needed to look flawless and camera-ready in every single frame. But here is where it gets even stranger still. None of those 5 female dolphins could ever fully master the show's signature tail walk trick, The dramatic move where Flipper appeared to stand upright on the water and glide backward across the surface. For that one specific stunt, the production had to bring in an entirely different dolphin altogether, a male named Clown, whose entire job on the set of Flipper was simply walking on water. Having 5 different dolphins on standby also meant the crew could keep shooting even when one animal simply wasn't in the mood that day. Something wild animal trainers of that era learned to plan around rather than fight against, treating each dolphin's temperament almost like scheduling a temperamental human co-star. Alright, we have to pause the countdown for just a quick second here. If you're genuinely enjoying these behind-the-scenes secrets about a show you thought you already knew everything about, do us a favor and hit that like button, subscribe if you're new around here, and let us know down in the comments which fact has surprised you the absolute most so far. Because trust us, the reveals from this point forward only get stranger and stranger, and a couple of them genuinely changed how people think about the entire show. Alright, let's get back into it with number 10. Number 10, the guest stars nobody watching had even recognized yet. Long before they became genuine household names, some seriously famous faces passed through the Coral Key Marine Preserve as guest stars on Flipper. And at the time, absolutely nobody watching at home had any idea what they were witnessing unfold on their screen. A young Burt Reynolds appeared across multiple episodes years before he became one of the biggest box office draws in all of America. Barbara Feldon showed up on the show before she became a beloved spy comedy icon on Get Smart soon after. James Best, later adored as Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane on The Dukes of Hazzard, turned up in an early episode too, long before that iconic role existed. And Daniel J. Travanti, who would eventually go on to win multiple Emmy Awards leading the cast of Hill Street Blues, also passed briefly through Coral Key during his own early career. Sounds like a strange coincidence, right? Not exactly. Ivan Tors Productions was based right there in Florida and constantly cycling through working actors who needed steady television paychecks, which meant Flipper unknowingly became a launching pad for careers that wouldn't fully take off for another decade or more down the road. So, the next time you rewatch an old episode, keep your eyes wide open. You might genuinely be looking at a future Emmy winner standing quietly on a dock, completely unaware of what was coming next for them. Even actor Michael Conrad, who later won 2 Emmy Awards for Hill Street Blues, quietly passed through Coral Key during this same stretch, making the Marine Preserve an accidental who's who of future television royalty that nobody planned for and nobody predicted at the time. Number 9, the underwater score borrowed straight from a French ballet. The moody, dreamlike music playing underneath Flipper's long, lingering underwater sequences wasn't just generic background filler thrown together to fill up airtime cheaply. Composers drew direct inspiration from Maurice Ravel's Daphnis et Chloe, the sweeping orchestral ballet score originally written decades earlier for a celebrated Paris ballet company. That's an unusually sophisticated pedigree for a Saturday night dolphin show, aimed squarely at kids and their families, and it gave those slow-motion underwater shots a surprisingly refined, almost cinematic feel that stood out from typical children's programming of that era. And what makes it even funnier is exactly how far that theme traveled internationally afterward. In France, the show's main theme song wasn't even called Flipper at all. It was retitled La Romance de Paris, or The Love Song of Paris, giving American audiences and French audiences a completely different emotional read on the exact same melody entirely. Even stranger, the first 5 episodes of Season 2 briefly swapped in a completely different version of the theme song, sung by Frankie Randall with entirely new lyrics, before producers quietly changed their minds and brought back the original version everyone already remembered. Turns out, even a dolphin theme song wasn't safe from a mid-season identity crisis of its own. Across various international broadcasts, the show was also redubbed and retitled into multiple languages, meaning kids in different countries grew up with subtly different versions of the exact same underwater adventure playing in their living rooms, each one carrying its own local flavor of that borrowed French ballet score. All while a single American dolphin quietly became a global star in half a dozen languages at once. Number 8. The young star who flat out refused a stunt double. Luke Halpin, who played the older Rick's son Sandy, wasn't just an actor reciting lines calmly near the water's edge. He insisted on personally performing nearly every one of his own stunts throughout the entire run of the series, including wrestling large, genuinely aggressive sharks to the surface during the tense shark hunt episode in Season 2. That's not exaggeration for dramatic effect either. Those really were live sharks hooked and hauled in for the cameras, with a teenage actor doing the raw physical work himself in open water. Sounds absolutely terrifying, right? It honestly was, and it happened far more often than most young television actors of that entire era would have ever agreed to attempt. But here is the twist worth knowing. Halpin only sat out 2 stunts across the entire series run, both of them simply deemed too dangerous even for him personally. One involved a genuine 20-foot dive straight out of a helicopter into open ocean water, and the other involved dodging real explosive charges rigged to look like naval gunfire, tearing through the water around a small wooden skiff. For both of those specific sequences, professional dolphin trainer Rick O'Barry stepped in as his stunt double, proving that even the bravest teenage actor in all of Florida still had his limits somewhere. Crew members reportedly grew used to watching Halpin dive straight into scenes. Most young actors would have negotiated their way out of entirely, treating shark wrangling almost like a normal Tuesday on set, rather than the genuine physical risk it actually was. Number 7. That unmistakable voice never actually came from a dolphin at all. Flipper's chattering, clicking, instantly recognizable vocalizations became one of the most iconic animal sounds in all of television history, immediately identifiable to anyone who grew up watching the show on Saturday nights. But here's the weird part nobody watching ever expected. That famous voice never actually came from a real dolphin's throat in the first place. Sound editors took a recording of an Australian kookaburra, a bird known for its wild, cackling laugh deep in the Australian bush, sped the recording up dramatically, and layered it electronically until it transformed into Flipper's signature playful chatter. Believe it or not, real bottlenose dolphins communicate using a completely different range of clicks, whistles, and squeaks that simply didn't translate well for dramatic television audio. So, producers went hunting for a substitute sound that felt more theatrical and expressive on screen. And what makes it even funnier is just how convincing that illusion turned out to be over the years. For decades, generations of kids grew up genuinely assuming that specific sound was exactly what a real dolphin sounded like out in the wild, when in reality, they were listening to a heavily processed bird call from an entirely different continent, thousands of miles from any ocean Flipper ever actually swam in. The kookaburra's distinctive call had already turned up in other film and television productions, looking for something exotic and larger than life. But few uses became as instantly recognizable or as widely mistaken for something else entirely as its work on Flipper, where an entire generation confidently mislabeled an Australian bird as the natural sound of an American bottlenose dolphin. A mix-up nobody working on the show ever bothered to correct. Number 6. The actor who got quietly written out of his own franchise entirely. Before there was a weekly television series, there was a 1963 feature film simply titled Flipper, starring Chuck Connors as Porter Ricks, alongside young Luke Halpin as his son Sandy. That original film performed well enough at the box office to justify a sequel almost immediately. But when Flipper's new adventure arrived the following year, something had clearly changed behind the scenes. Chuck Connors was gone entirely from the franchise, replaced by actor Brian Kelly in the exact same role, and the character's backstory shifted right along with him, transforming Porter Ricks from a working commercial fisherman into a park ranger trainee instead. Sounds like a strange creative choice, right? Not exactly, once you understand the reasoning behind it. Producer Ivan Tors reportedly believed the ranger setup offered far more storytelling potential for an ongoing weekly series than a simple fisherman's boat ever realistically could. Kelly stayed on when the property moved over to weekly television, and producers made him a widower, quietly raising his sons alone, adding an entirely new younger son named Bud into the family mix. That new character, played by young Tommy Norton, would go on to appear in 84 of the series' 88 episodes, essentially inheriting a role invented purely to make the leap to television actually work. Kathleen McGuire, who had played Sandy's mother in the original 1963 film, quietly vanished from the story entirely along with Connors, with the sequel simply establishing Porter as a widower and never dwelling on the loss any further than that. a quiet narrative shortcut that let the franchise move forward without ever explaining exactly what had happened off-screen, treating a major cast change as though it had simply never occurred at all. Number 5. The same underwater crew that helped create a legendary movie monster elsewhere. Ivan Tors Films built its entire reputation on skilled underwater filmmaking, and that specialized expertise reached far beyond one single dolphin show into some genuinely unexpected corners of Hollywood history. Rico Browning, who co-created Flipper and personally directed much of the television series, had an entirely separate claim to fame that most casual viewers never once connected back to the show. Years earlier, Browning had actually played the title creature in Creature from the Black Lagoon, performing every underwater scene inside that iconic Gillman costume that terrified moviegoers throughout the entire 1950s. And that's not even the only crossover worth mentioning either. The same underwater production team behind Flipper also handled the elaborate underwater battle sequences for Thunderball, one of the biggest James Bond films in the entire 1960s franchise lineup. Sounds like an unlikely resume for a dolphin show's creative team, right? Not exactly, once you realize just how small and specialized the world of underwater cinematography actually was back then. The same small handful of divers, technicians, and camera operators teaching a dolphin to hit its marks were also filming spies fighting henchmen beneath the waves for one of the era's biggest blockbusters. Cinematographer Lamar Boren, who shot underwater sequences across the Flipper universe, carried that exact same specialized skill set into James Bond's world, proving just how tightly connected 1960s underwater production really was behind the scenes, with a small circle of Florida-based specialists quietly shaping both a children's dolphin show and a global spy franchise at nearly the same time. Number 4. The trainer who realized the dolphins could recognize themselves on television. Rick O'Barry, the head trainer responsible for teaching all 5 dolphins their tricks, developed an unusually close personal bond with the animals during production, and one small habit he picked up along the way would eventually change his entire outlook on the industry he worked in. On Friday nights, O'Barry would run an extension cord down to the poolside enclosure so the dolphins could actually watch themselves performing live on the television broadcast of their own show. That's not a joke or a slight exaggeration. He genuinely did this on a regular basis throughout production. And here is where it gets genuinely strange to think about. O'Barry became convinced the dolphins recognized themselves clearly on screen, reacting differently to their own footage than they did to ordinary background noise or completely unrelated programming. That single observation planted an uncomfortable question in his mind that he simply couldn't shake off afterward, one that had nothing at all to do with entertainment. If these animals were self-aware enough to recognize their own reflection on a screen, what exactly gave anyone the right to keep them confined inside a small enclosure for the rest of their lives, performing tricks for an audience that had no real idea what it was actually looking at? That quiet poolside habit of running an extension cord out to the water turned out to be one of the first small cracks in a belief system O'Barry had built his entire career on, long before he ever imagined where that doubt would eventually lead him. Number 3. The motorcycle accident that ended a career practically overnight. Brian Kelly, who played family patriarch Porter Ricks across all 88 episodes of the series, had built a steady, respectable career as a leading man throughout the 1960s, anchoring a hit family show alongside 2 young co-stars and one very famous dolphin. On camera, everything about his career trajectory looked stable, promising, and built for a long, comfortable future in television. Off camera, things took a sudden and genuinely devastating turn nobody anticipated. In 1971, just a few years after Flipper wrapped its final season, Kelly was severely injured in a motorcycle accident that left him with lasting physical damage serious enough to effectively end his acting career for good. That was not an accident anyone around him ever saw coming, and it happened astonishingly fast, transforming a working television star into someone who largely disappeared from the industry almost overnight afterward. Sounds genuinely tragic, right? It absolutely was, and it's a stark reminder of just how fragile stardom from that particular era really could be behind the glossy surface. One motorcycle ride changed everything, and unlike so many of his castmates who found ways to stay connected to entertainment for decades afterward, Kelly's chapter in Hollywood closed abruptly. far earlier than anyone watching those Saturday night broadcasts could have ever predicted. Where Halpin and Norden occasionally resurfaced for reunions, interviews, and nostalgic anniversary events over the following decades, Kelly largely stepped away from public life, leaving fans with far fewer answers about how the rest of his story actually played out after the cameras finally stopped rolling on Coral Key for good. Number 2, the reboot machine Flipper accidentally built without even trying to. Flipper's success didn't just create 3 seasons of memorable Saturday night television, it quietly launched an entire entertainment franchise that kept resurfacing decades after the original series first ended its run. In 1996, a brand new Flipper feature film hit theaters starring Paul Hogan, alongside a young Elijah Wood, introducing an entirely new generation of kids to that same basic premise of a boy bonding with a loyal, intelligent dolphin. Around the same period, a syndicated television revival called Flipper. The new adventures ran for a full 98 episodes, this time following a team of marine scientists studying dolphins along the Florida coastline, and featuring a young actress named Jessica Alba, years before she became a genuine Hollywood star. Sounds like an awful lot of dolphin content for one single franchise, right? Not exactly a coincidence at all. Every one of these later projects traced its creative DNA directly back to the original 1964 series, and the genuine emotional connection audiences felt toward one specific, camera-ready bottlenose dolphin. Half a century after Kathy first swam onto American television screens, production companies were still betting real money that audiences would show up for a dolphin adventure story. And more often than not, they were absolutely right to bet that way. Even the Miami Seaquarium leaned into that legacy directly, hosting a 50th anniversary celebration in 2013 that reunited original cast member Tommy Norden alongside co-creator Rico Browning for a genuinely emotional look back at where it all began, decades after the cameras first started rolling on that little Florida marine preserve. Number 1, the death that changed how the entire world sees dolphins forever. This is the fact that makes everything else on this list feel small by comparison. And honestly, it's why we saved it for last. Kathy, the primary dolphin who portrayed Flipper throughout most of the series, spent years performing for cameras and adoring audiences who had no real idea what her actual life in captivity looked like behind the scenes of a hit show. In 1970, not long after the show ended its production run, Kathy died in trainer Rick O'Barry's arms at the Miami Seaquarium in a moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But here is where it gets genuinely heavy. O'Barry has spent decades since insisting that her death wasn't an ordinary medical event at all. He describes it as a deliberate act, something close to suicide, explaining that dolphins are conscious breathers who must actively choose to take every single breath they ever take, and that Kathy simply looked him directly in the eye and stopped choosing to breathe entirely. That was not an accident, he has insisted publicly for years since. That single moment shattered O'Barry completely. And instead of continuing his career as a marine animal trainer, he walked away from the industry entirely and became one of the most outspoken anti-captivity activists on the entire planet, eventually starring in the Academy Award-winning documentary, The Cove, which exposed the brutal dolphin hunting industry in Taiji, Japan, to a global audience. The very show that made America fall in love with dolphins also, quietly and painfully, helped inspire the movement now fighting to set them free. Decades later, O'Barry was even briefly detained by immigration officials while trying to enter Japan to continue that same advocacy work. A strange full-circle moment for a man whose career began with one heartbreaking afternoon on set. And there you have it, 15 wild and surprising facts about Flipper, the 1964 series that turned one clever bottlenose dolphin into television's most beloved animal star. Which one shocked you the most, and which ones did we somehow miss along the way? Drop it in the comments below, because we always genuinely love hearing from you, and tell us honestly if you had any idea what was really happening behind those sunny, easygoing Florida broadcasts you grew up with. And if you want more deep dives into the classic shows and stars you grew up watching, make sure to subscribe and stick around for what's coming next. We've got plenty more where this came from, and if a simple dolphin show from 1964 could hide this many genuine secrets, just imagine what else is waiting to be uncovered behind the next familiar rerun. you decide to revisit on some quiet weekend afternoon years from now.